Hi everybody, this is Craig Tanner for The Mindful Eye and the Daily Critique. Today's image was submitted by Reiner, who's an intermediate photographer. Reiner says every fall this field is planted with wildflowers, and this was a spectacular morning with dew and with fog. And as shooting was winding down, someone cued the horses, and Reiner got off a couple of shots before they moved to another part of the pasture. This was shot with a Tamron 24 to 135 zoom lens at 69 millimeters and at ISO 100. Reiner stopped down to f29 and exposed the file for 8/10 of a second. Let's get right into it here. The moment is great, and I really love what has happened here just in terms of creating this foreground space that allows the horses to have a space to separate in and the pasture. And just the framing where there's breathing room around the top of the flowers and breathing room down here around sort of the bottom line of the flowers. And very classical placement of some of the main ideas. The highest energy part of the flowers as they move up on this line is breaking the frame in a dynamic way, and the horses are too. They're almost 50-50 on the up and down in the image, but left to right, the horses are in a real dynamic place, particularly these horses. The black and the white horse here, real powerful point in the image once you see it, and it's playing off in a real dynamic way. This idea up here, it's really nice too how there's a diagonal movement from the highest energy point on the flowers here back over to the horses. And even this line of the trees back here, I'm really enjoying how that's playing off of the movement of the flowers overall and also just the shape of the flowers. Um, Quality of light here is beautiful. You get a sense of the fog sort of clearing, but the real soft light goes along really well with a shot like this where Reiner's just shooting the pasture and you're not including the sky in the shot. A lot of things working really well here. When I started to think about perfect world improvement for this image, one of the biggest things that I think about is color. And as much as I love the framing and as much as I love the idea of the wildflowers, the fall wildflowers and the fall foliage, and how all these things are configured in terms of their placement in the scene, from a color theory standpoint, one of the things that's taking away from my enjoyment of the image is a clash that's happening with the pinks and the oranges. And just bringing the color wheel here for a minute, it's pretty interesting if you do a Google search of color theory. You'll get all this information on colors that work well together. You get a lot of information about complementary color, colors that are opposites on the color wheel, like blue and orange, that can drive a lot of dynamic depth into anything that you're designing. But what you don't see so much about is color clashing, and part of that is because unlike saying these two colors are opposites and being able to, in a very scientific mathematical way, talk about how they play off of each other, color clashing to some extent is a lot more subjective. But a lot of people agree that two colors that are very, very difficult to play off of each other are any kind of version of pink and orange. And so it's just something to remember. It's not saying that it can't work. It's not saying that color clash may not be the idea that you're going for. But it's a combination of two colors, and I don't think I've ever specifically mentioned this in the whole time that I've been doing the Daily Critique. It's a combination of two colors that a lot of times create quite a bit of visual dissonance. And what essentially that we're saying here is that when you're looking at this image, it's very, very difficult to be in this space back here without getting pulled back to the pink, and vice versa. It's very difficult to enjoy the pink with so much orange in the shot. This image is laid out so beautifully and it's such a great moment. Anytime I have any kind of a color issue that I don't think I'll be able to correct, and the difficulty in correcting this is that if all the flowers were sort of one color, particularly if they were all this dark pink, might be pretty easy to go in there and turn this to a primary red. Now red and orange play very well together, and red and green play very well together. So if all these flowers were a primary red, then from a color theory standpoint it might work, but then you'd have the other issue of what's happening in terms of the weight that you're trying to talk about of the two main subjects, which to me is the flowers and the horses and how they play with each other. So anytime I'm really struggling to manage color, and I tried to change the hue of these flowers and it wasn't working for me. I think about black and white. I just go ahead and have a look. And in this case, I looked at the red channel in black and white, and I liked it quite a bit right away, just doing that and not doing anything else. Something else that I immediately sort of became aware of when I looked at this image was that it would be very subjective moving forward from this point for Reiner, or let's say whoever was shooting or working on this image, to decide how you wanted to play the weight between the flowers and the horses. You could give the flowers more weight and leave the horses as sort of a discovery. You could turn the flowers way down and bring the contrast on the horses up and bring them forward, or you could sort of play them even, or any sort of minor variation thereof. And for me, with this image being so soft to start off with, I started to do something that I do so much in the editing process. Even if I'm looking at an image small, I'll do what I'm doing right now. You can probably hear me. I'll scoot back in my chair. My chair is on rollers here on a big pad. And I'll scoot back in my chair and I'll look at the image from a distance and start trying to just take in the image in more of an abstract way. And a lot of times that'll help me decide or sort of imagine looking at the image as a print. And when I do that, what I think about in this image is potentially a very big print, where from a long way away you would get this sort of pattern feeling, and then as you got closer you'd discover the horses and they would draw you in just because once you saw them as such a powerful archetypal idea. So I thought of lowering the contrast overall and pushing this sort of towards this ethereal, sort of dreamy kind of feeling. And so on this layer, I reduced the contrast on the flowers. I just did that by picking a point on the curve near the flowers, picking 2 points, kind of putting the flowers in the middle and flattening that area of the curve out. Then I came in and I added film grain to again sort of tie everything together. Grain will do that. It's sort of an overlay to start to try and tie everything together, and again just continuing to push for sort of this dreamy feeling overall. And then I came in and I did some cloning, and I did the cloning to get rid of some ideas like this and this little white spot behind the horse and some of these flowers and points that are real high contrast. And I thought of trying to make this shape more of a definite shape, and also just playing off of the shape, the line, the quality of line that we're seeing in the line of the horses. And so just cleaning that up a little bit, and here's what that work looks like. I'll turn that on and off again. I'm trying to just simplify the overall shape of the flowers, not only to play off of the shape of the horses, line of the horses, but also the line of the heads of the hardwoods in the background. This is so subtle you probably can't see it, and you really can't. It's just a tiny adjustment to contrast on the horses. This is not so subtle. I came in and again, to reduce contrast, I got rid of this feeling of the pasture in here getting dark in some places, and that's starting to take weight away from the horses. Just going to continue to push for lower and lower contrast. And so here is where we started, and here's where we ended up. Would love to hear your feedback about this critique, and it's a really beautiful image. Great job by Reiner from a technical standpoint with very little time. Looking at the shutter speed here, I have to assume that Reiner shot this from the tripod. So really good job of doing a beautiful job of framing this scene in a very short amount of time. This is something that's unexpected, and those kinds of shots can be really tough. Really gorgeous landscape image, bringing a lot of beautiful things together. We want to say a big thank you to Reiner for sharing this image with us on the Mindful Eyes Daily Critique.